Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
Do you want coffee? Betty asked. No, I'm in a big hurry. I had breakfast at work, answered Stephen, and looked at her husband carefully. For a long time, he refused to eat breakfast at home. She did not know what it was connected with. And I made you a delicious breakfast, your favorite pancakes. You love them so much. Maybe I should wrap them up for you at work. Betty smiled, expecting her husband to be pleased by her concern. But her expectations were not met. Stephen sighed irritably. What are you making up? You've never even carried a lunchbox to work. What a schoolboy. Do you want me to be laughed at? I realize you don't even think about it, but I suggest you be a little smarter. I'm way past the age where my mom makes me breakfast for school. And I haven't liked horses for a long time. It's a relic of the past. We have a wonderful canteen where you can order any dish of healthy and wholesome food. And Velodia has nothing healthy, and I advise you not to put it on them. Or you'll have even more problems with your figure later than you have now. Betty looked at herself confusedly, scrutinizing from all sides. What was wrong with her figure? She doesn't seem to be fat. Stephen picked up his substitute bag where he put important papers and documents. He quickly looked at himself in the mirror, scrutinizing every detail of his clothes, discerning a non-existent crease on his pants. He adjusted his tie and hummed in satisfaction, smiling slightly. Gosh, how pleased with himself was he. Stephen grabbed his wallet, his cell phone, and his car keys. Without even a glance in his wife's direction, he sparingly tossed her goodbye and rushed off. Don't expect me early today, we have a meeting. The boss is going to give everyone a hard time. And I, as the most responsible and perfect employee, will have to calm him down. And Stephen left. Betty stood by the window. She looked out at the street and absent-mindedly ran her finger over her mug. Her gaze froze. Her husband had already left, and she continued to stare at one point. She was still thinking about what Stephen had said. Did she have a problem with her figure? Yeah, she wasn't as slim and trim as she was when she was younger, but she wasn't even in her 20s anymore. Okay, she's not old, she's only 38. But you have to take into account that she doesn't lead as active a life as she used to. She's a housewife. She stays home, cooks, cleans, suffers from idleness. Why is she not like other women? She doesn't need to spend endless hours in beauty parlors to feel confident. The treatments she does at home are enough for her. Betty was startled by a sharp phone call. She picked up the phone and said hello, but her answer was silence. Once again, there was silence. Betty began to lose patience. Who's messing around? Who can't be bothered? If you call again, I'll file a police report and they'll find you out. She got a dial tone. Betty disconnected the phone and banged the receiver on the table. I'm sick of this. What do they want? She'd mentioned these calls to her husband, but he brushed them off. Never mind. There's a lot of fools out there. Maybe it's someone from work, just messing around. I have several competitors who would like to have a reputation like mine and take my place. But that takes years of hard work. Never mind Betty. Stephen took a long time to build his reputation. Medicine isn't the most lucrative business in the beginning, and then you're lucky. Stephen started out as an orderly during university. He worked nights in the emergency room. It wasn't the best of jobs, but the kid was determined. Then he was accepted as a nurse. And after graduation, he became a doctor. But he didn't like working in such a place. The salary is small, and there is a lot of work, and there is no free time and no development. At the hospital, Stephen met a patient who later became his wife. It was Betty. The girl fell in love with the young surgeon, and he fell in love with her too. They married quickly. And then Stephen quit the hospital, and they moved to another city. And Stephen's thorny journey as a doctor began. He changed several jobs, and he didn't like any of them. Surgeon is a promising profession, but only if you work in the right place. And Stephen never found the right place. The family was always short of money. Children were out of the question. Stephen got angry when Betty brought it up. What kid's in the know? Do you realize what you're saying? We're barely making ends meet ourselves. And if the baby comes, you'll go on maternity leave? What are we gonna do? I can't work around the clock. A man needs rest, you know. And I'm not a robot to do surgeries without a break. And please don't talk about the baby anymore. You're just making me angry and upset. I'm not feeling well enough. And you and your suggestions. And Betty, don't bring up these conversations anymore. The couple waited for better times. Betty supported her husband as best she could. And Stephen was grateful for that. Not every woman would share her husband's troubles and hardships, but Betty did it out of love for her husband. Isn't that what a wife should do? The situation changed about 5 years ago at a conference in another city where Stephen was sent on a business trip. He met a nationally known surgeon. He didn't know him, but Stephen wasn't afraid to try his luck. He wanted to catch luck by the tail. He approached him himself and introduced himself. The brash young doctor took a liking to the professor. Stephen reminded him of himself in his youth. The professor also had to dig the ground with his hands, achieving authority and high position in the medical society. So he suggested that he move to Moscow, where the professor could find a good place for him. Stephen jumped at the idea. Betty couldn't even say anything. Her husband didn't ask her opinion. She quit her job, and they just moved to Moscow. And the professor found him a place with a friend of his in an expensive and famous clinic. So Stephen began to work in a very prestigious place. And then the money flowed into the family. From the very beginning, Stephen won the trust of the owner of the clinic, John. The young surgeon was an excellent doctor. The experience in various hospitals, where Stephen had to operate one after another. He had built up his hand and gained invaluable experience. There were very few such doctors in the city. Everyone tried to get to prestigious places after the institute. But Stephen had seen a lot in his practice. And now he could perform any operation. Stephen and Betty quickly became rich. They bought a nice mansion. They had nice cars. Betty could get away from work now. Stephen wanted her to stay home. She didn't resist. She wasn't very comfortable in Moscow. The big city scared her, and she was even more afraid to work. Who was she here? Just another provincial girl trying to make a name for herself. That's her husband, who quickly settled in the big city. He's been striving for this all his life. And now his ego was being pampered every day. He was in his own environment. Betty shook his head, waking up from the memory that it's me like an old granny, sitting around burning. Got business to attend to. Well, there's nothing to do if she's got nothing to do. She doesn't have to clean. There's a new service every week. She doesn't have to cook either. Her husband hardly eats at home now. He spends more and more time at work. He comes home late. If he was going to eat at home, he ordered food delivery from a restaurant, and Betty didn't even have to puzzle over coming up with a menu. Although Betty remembered the time when they had lived poorly, she remembered it fondly. She suffered a lot. Her husband admired her culinary skills. She was always making him breakfast. And her husband never refused to eat. And now she didn't want that. He'd been acting strangely lately. Betty even suspected that he had another woman, but he didn't smell of another man's perfume. He hadn't called her any alien names. It was probably a figment of her sick imagination. And then the phone rang again. Betty jumped in surprise, for crying out loud. But this time it was her friend, whom they hadn't seen in a long time. Clara used to work at the beauty parlor where Betty used to go for manicures. And then she got lucky. She married a wealthy man. And after that, she never worked again. But she and Betty remained good friends. They talked regularly. She'd invite her to a restaurant for dinner in the evening. But Betty didn't know when Stephen would arrive, and after talking to her friend, the woman decided to call her husband. He was unlikely to pick up his cell phone. So Betty called directly to his office. If he was free, he'd answer. But he didn't answer the phone. Some girl did. I'm listening. Hello. Could you put Stephen on the phone, please? Betty didn't see what was coming. God, how do you all know his number? Who gives it to you? How many times can you tell everyone that it's his work number for staff and not for patients? You can't do that. You can't get a free phone consultation anyway. You have to make an appointment at the clinic for that. I should tell John to look into the matter. Betty is dumbfounded. That this is a girl, that she would tell her off over the phone like that without even knowing the caller's identity. I'm sorry, I didn't know you couldn't call this number. But the thing is This number was given to me by my husband, and he said I could call anytime. I'm Stephen's wife." There was an awkward pause. And then the girl said in a different voice, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't recognize you." "I didn't know it was you, I'm sorry, Stephen." "Stephen's busy. I'll tell him you called." "I'll call you back," and the girl hung up. Betty bit his lip thoughtfully as well. Strange. What was this strange girl's behavior, and what was she doing in her husband's office? And why was she talking so rudely? If it was one of the clinic's employees, she was behaving completely inappropriately. And his assistant couldn't have answered like that. However, then Betty thought about it. Why did this strange girl call the owner of the clinic by name, and if she was in her husband's office, what was she doing there in his absence? Betty realized that the old suspicion of infidelity was returning again. How to check everything? I have to meet with Clara after all, or I'll go crazy with these thoughts alone. Betty decided to leave the thoughts of her husband's possible mistress for now and called her friend. She will talk to Clara tonight. Maybe you could give her some advice, or at least reassure her? That evening, Betty took a cab to the restaurant. Clara was already sitting at a table, waiting for her friend. She had lost even more weight. Now she looked like a photo model with her tall stature. No one would say that this girl used to work as a manicurist. Right now, Clara looked gorgeous. She quickly got used to the good life. She learned to enjoy all the charms of a rich life. However, this woman was very intelligent and observant. She could even find a way out of the most terrible situation. When Clara saw Betty, she jumped up sharply from the sofa and threw herself on Betty's neck. "I missed you so much, honey. It's so good to see you. You have no idea. I'm ready to kick your ass. I hope you're not driving. I have big plans for tonight." Her wide smile was replaced by a stern grimace. Betty laughed. "Yeah, I took a cab without a car. I want to relax today too." Clara immediately smiled again and squeezed her friend's hands tightly. "That's fine. Everything is going according to plan. I like you a lot today. Come on, sit closer to me. By the way, remind me to tell the restaurant manager that the sofas here are just wonderful. How good. So comfortable. I haven't had one in a while. And I'm particularly fond of this corner. There's no one near us. No one can stop us from having fun and gossiping." And Clara giggled loudly. Betty couldn't contain her smile as she looked at her energetic friend. Betty wasn't like that, though the age difference between the two of them was negligible. Just 4 years old, Clara was 34 years old. But in terms of energy, Betty was much weaker. Apparently, it must be inherent in a person. It was strange that such different women found common ground and became friends, but they did. Clara was glowing. She had so many emotions that she seemed like a young girl. Betty, on the other hand, was reserved, like a normal, mature woman. An hour and a half flew by. The women had dinner, drank 2 glasses of wine each. It was mostly Clara who talked. Her active life was interesting. Betty listened to her with pleasure. She described her trip with colorful descriptions, so that Betty had a clear picture of every detail. When the flow of stories had dried up, she looked at her friend and said quietly in a way that was not usual for her, "I understand that you won't start talking yourself, but I can see everything. There's something wrong with you. So you better start talking. I'm not going to leave you alone. Let's not waste any time." Betty blushed. "I hope Clara doesn't notice." "What are you talking about?" "Oh, don't kid me. You know how many years I've worked with people. I know exactly what's in a person's heart. What's wrong with you?" "Health problems. Depression, husband." Betty realized that Clara was going to get to the truth anyway. It's better to ask her advice right away. "Husband, there's something wrong between us. Don't think I'm crazy. There's no proof, but I can feel it. My gut never deceives me. As unfortunate as it sounds, I think he's with another woman, but that's just a suspicion that's unsupported." Clara listened to her friend. Betty talked nonstop for a long time about the clinic. His late arrivals, Holmes' silent phone calls. His dismissive attitude when she reprimanded S. She felt immediately better. "You know, I realize now that it's all nonsense. I'm just making it up out of idleness. I need something to do. Then I won't have time to look for proof of things that aren't real. I'm just so stupid." Clara didn't laugh and support her friend as Betty had expected. She was very serious. Without a shadow of a smile, she said, "So why do you think it's all fiction?" "You know, I believe in your intuition. How long have I known you? It's never let you down before. There's not enough time in the evening to list all the moments. So, honey, I suggest you think about it. And it's easy enough to solve the problem of proof, cheating, or fidelity. Nowadays, it's not relevant to follow a person yourself. There are special people for that. They will make everything work clearly and quickly. This is not a cheap pleasure and very even expensive, but it's worth it, believe me. I have a contract for a good detective who could take your case. I'll give it to you if you decide to go all the way." Betty bit her lip. The alcohol made Slag's offer tempting. But how could Betty do that to her husband? They'd lived for so many years, trusted each other, been together for better and for worse. If she spies on her husband, it's the end of that trust, and she prided herself on being honest with each other. "I need some air. I'll be right back." Betty stood up and headed for the exit of the restaurant. She felt a little dizzy. She needed some fresh air outside. She would be back to normal in no time. Clara didn't follow her friend. She gave the opportunity to be alone as well. Betty stood outside for about 5 minutes. It was already dark. Her consciousness cleared a little and she calmed down. Just as she was about to enter the restaurant, someone called out to her. "Betty, Betty, it's you." Betty shuddered. I turned around. The voice was so familiar. And she was scrutinizing the man standing in front of her. No, it couldn't be. "Really?" Betty said in amazement. The man in front of her smiled broadly and came close to her. "Did you recognize me?" And Christopher suddenly hugged Betty tightly from around her. Betty gasped in fright and then laughed. She clung to the man's shoulders and closed her eyes. For a moment, immersed in memories. Christopher had been her high school sweetheart. They'd been in love with each other in 10th, 11th grade, and then their paths parted. For 2 whole years of such strong feelings, the whole school knew about their Christopher. Everyone was sure that it was true love and they would never part. The guys themselves made plans for the future, planning to be together for the rest of their lives. There was simply no other option. Betty and Christopher's parents. At the graduation party, they laughed that they were going to have a wedding soon. Everything was great, but their plans were ruined the moment Christopher didn't get into the university and was sent to the army. After the army, he never returned to the city. His parents decided to go abroad. They took their son and disappeared. The connection between the lovers disappeared. Betty suffered for several months. Then she realized that life goes on, and she needed to move on without Christopher, without memories, without suffering. And then she met her husband, and the past love simply forgot itself. Above, Betty had never met Christopher. Life scattered them in different directions. This unexpected encounter stirred something deep inside Betty. Her heart was pounding so hard that it felt like it was right inside her head. Her head was dizzy from the alcohol she had drunk and the sudden rush of feelings. She opened her eyes and pleaded with Christopher. "Let me go. I'm getting dizzy." "No, I can't let you go. It's just unbelievable. How come we met in a city where I'm just passing through Yakutia? Is it fate? No, I'm not just gonna let you go. Do you have to have dinner with me? Oh no, I'm here with a friend right now, and I've already had dinner, and I have to go home. My husband's gonna be worried." Christopher immediately let her go. The words about her husband sobered him up, and he immediately pulled himself together. "We already are. All right, if you're busy right now. Betty, I really want to talk to you. Please, let's meet tomorrow, I'm begging you." Betty wanted to say no, but her mind was still reeling, and she realized that she wanted to talk to Christopher badly. After all, it wouldn't be a date, right? Just a meeting with a good friend from her youth and nothing more. So she agreed. They exchanged phone numbers, agreed to meet the next day, and Betty returned to her friend's table. The conversation didn't go well because Betty was in the clouds, remembering her meeting with Christopher. Soon the women went home. As Betty was leaving in a cab, Clara had time to shout to her, "Think about the detective. If anything, you can count on me." The next day, Betty got up late. Her husband wasn't home when she returned from the restaurant the day before. Betty didn't wait for him and went to bed. At night, she heard him come in. But then she fell asleep again. And in the morning he was gone. And Betty realized that it was a waste to get up so early to see him off. He doesn't need this at all. She texted Stephen that she was going out with a friend tonight. He read the message but didn't respond. Betty hummed, "Well, yeah, why reply if you don't care?" Oh well. The day went by without a hitch. Betty changed outfits several times trying to find the right one. She didn't know what to do with her hair. Then she caught herself acting like she was going on a date. "Betty, stop. Why are you getting yourself worked up?" Angrily, she said to herself. After all, she didn't have time to change anymore. She was running late. As she rode in the cab, it seemed to her that there was traffic all around, cars barely moving, and she thought she was terribly late. But she arrived 15 minutes early. However, Christopher was already sitting at the table. Apparently, he was afraid of being late too, so he arrived early. When Betty approached the table, Christopher stood up to give her a hug. Betty was very tense today. She didn't know what it would promise her either. They sat down, placed their order. Then they talked about this and that. Betty told her that she was married, that her husband was a very respected doctor at a prestigious hospital. Christopher said that he had never been married. At these words, he looked Betty intently in the eyes, and she was confused by the look. It was as if he was telling her that she was the cause of his loneliness. As they had a glass of wine, Betty relaxed a little. They reminisced about their youth, about school, laughed about curiosities. And Betty felt so good, as if she was back home after a long absence. She remembered that she had always felt so good and relaxed around Christopher. And then there was an awkward pause. Christopher looked at Betty, and she lost the stem of her glass thoughtfully. "Do you ever wonder how our lives would have turned out if we hadn't broken up abruptly?" Christopher asked her. Betty shuddered and looked embarrassed. What's there to think about? It didn't work out. Why guess about something that couldn't have? But we had planned so much. It wasn't our fault we broke up. It was supposed to be different. I've been thinking about it my whole life. Betty, I don't believe you haven't. Betty looked away. Yes, she had thought. Of course, she was afraid to admit it to him. She loved him too much to just forget him like that. When she had met Stephen, new feelings had swept over her head, and love, except for lying at the bottom of her soul, and she had not thought of him for some time. But with each passing year, she thought more and more about what she was living through. A life not according to her own script, that she was destined for something else. But she had gotten back off track, and now she was forced to live a life that was not her own. The more she thought about it, the more she tried to get rid of those thoughts. She had chosen her own husband. She had married of her own free will. She had wanted it. Lately, her dissatisfaction with married life, her suspicions about her husband's infidelity had done their work. She realized that something had to change, and the place to start was to look for evidence of Stephen's infidelity or his fidelity. If he is pure to her, then she made the right choice in marrying him. And if he's cheating on her, then that means he doesn't need her anymore. Betty looked at Christopher and sighed. Christopher, of course you are right. Things could have been different, but they were the way they were. There's nothing to guess at. I'm glad to see you, of course, but you'll be leaving soon. You see the pleasant memories. I'm glad I met you. I remember my youth. But it's all in the past, remembered and then forgotten again. Christopher turned slightly pale and then whispered to her, I don't want to forget anything. Betty, don't you realize that I've never forgotten you? I've always loved you. You're the only one in the world for me. I've never loved anyone else. I didn't get married because I'd always dreamed of you. You've always been in my thoughts, and I believe we met for a reason. Fate has brought us together again. Only now I won't miss my chance. Betty stared at Christopher in shock. Her heart was pounding like a hammer on a table. She only shook her head and said quietly to Christopher, I'm married. That says it all. I don't know what else to tell you. And please think about what I said. I sense that your life is not going well. You have the face of a woman who is unhappy by the way you talk. I realized that it's not because of lack of money or health problems. You're unhappy because you're not being heard, not being understood. I can make you happy. I can take you with me. I'll always be there for you. I'll never let you go again. If you come with me, I love you. Do you hear me? I really do love you very much. Christopher took Betty's hand and squeezed it, but she just looked at him and tears welled up in her eyes. Oh, how are you holding it in? It's too late. Christopher, it's too late. I can't leave my husband. I'm loyal to him. We've been through too much together. We trust each other. I can't just leave just because you called me. I'm not that smart, you know that. Yeah, I know you're not. I love you too much to make you do anything against your will. I don't have to. You have to want to. I'm asking you to think about what I'm saying. I'll leave you every phone number I have. Wherever I am, what city or country, I'll answer one of them for sure. Please, if you suddenly change your mind, please call me and I'll come get you from the other side of the earth. Betty looked teary-eyed. Was this all really happening to her? As Betty rode home in the cab, she was not thinking about Christopher. She was thinking of her husband. She had parted with Christopher on a touching note. He kept assuring her that he could change her life if she wanted to. But Betty didn't want to ruin her current life, family relationships, marriage, unless her husband had already ruined it himself. And for that, she would have to find out for herself. Not relying on chance, as Betty pulled up to the house, she dialed Clara's number. Hi, listen, I'll think about your offer. Give me the phone number of that man you were talking about. I'm gonna call him. I want to know if things have gone from bad to worse. She called the detectives. The next day, they made an appointment. And a day later, Betty was sitting in his office. She could barely find the right place. There was no sign on the door. The building itself was unremarkable, as if the detective was hiding his whereabouts, or knowledgeable people might be able to find him. Most likely, this man only worked by acquaintance. Otherwise, how else to explain the fact that he didn't even advertise his services? Betty was sitting on an ordinary chair. She was cramped because she was very uncomfortable in this place. Across from her at a desk sat a detective. There was nothing on his desk but a thin black folder and a pen. Clara had told her that his name was William. Betty, however, was shy about calling him by his first name. Nice to meet you. William, excuse me, what's your middle name? Carefully, she asked. William is just William. After a short pause, the detective replied. He continued to scrutinize his potential clientele. Usually, if he didn't like a client, he refused his services immediately, citing his busy schedule. Betty was not the type of person he mainly favored. She didn't look like a rich woman looking for her runaway son or daughter. Nor did she look like a cheating spouse. She was too modest and reserved. It's hard to get the right information out of someone like that, and you can't get much money. He didn't like working with them. He was more attracted to rich clients. However, Clara vouched for her friend, told the detectives that the woman was able to pay the required amount without problems. But she needed the help of a professional. So William agreed to meet Betty, and when he saw her, he was amazed to find that she looked a lot like his dead sister. Before he even started talking to Betty, he already knew that he would help her in memory of his own sister. He wouldn't even charge her any money, or just token money. Judging by the woman sitting in front of him, she wouldn't agree to let him work for free. But I'm listening to you seriously, said Betty, a little confused. She didn't know how to start such conversations, how to ask for a favor or to go straight to discussing payment. I'm sorry, I don't know where to start. Unsure, she said. William continued to look at her. Yes, it was obvious that this was the first time she had asked for this kind of service. She would have to help her. Otherwise, she would run away from him without getting the help she needed. And he already said to her in a slightly friendly manner, "Start with why you need a detective service, and then we'll take it from there. I need to find out if my husband is cheating on me or not." Betty spoke quickly, before she lost her nerve. Well, the reason is quite trivial. William could barely contain a smile. No matter what happens in the world, women always want to know that they are the only one in the men's lives. That's fine. That's my kind of thing. Then tell me why you suspect him of this. Is there any evidence? And then we'll get personal. Let's write down everything we need. Personal details of where he works and what hours he works. What kind of car he drives, when he leaves and comes home. I need to know everything. Betty took a deep breath and started talking. She talked for a long time without stopping. William did not look at her, but only took notes. Betty talked so long that her mouth was dry. She was silent for a moment, trying not to tell her face. William pulled a carafe of water and a glass from underneath. He moved it toward Betty. She poured herself some water, drank it, thanked the detective. As she continued talking, Betty thought about the fact that it wasn't so bad. And she had almost calmed down already. When she finished speaking, she fell silent, waiting for questions from the detective. But after a minute, he slammed the folder with his notes and said, "Great. I don't even have any questions for you. You've got it all laid out. You're very observant. You didn't miss a single detail. You told me exactly what I needed to know and nothing too much." Betty smiled shyly. "When can we say goodbye for a while? I don't think I'll have any trouble finding out anything you're interested in. I have your phone number saved. I'll call you in 2 weeks. What about payment? We have to agree on payment." William smiled slightly. "I'll charge you a small advance. The rest after the end of our cooperation." The detective wrote something in a small notebook, tore out a sheet of paper, and handed it to Betty. She, looking at the piece of paper, was surprised by so little. "I'm told your services are not cheap. I thought I would have to pay more even in advance. No, that's enough. And the rest of the fee isn't very much either. The cost of my services depends on the complexity of the work. Checking the husband is not included in the list of complex work, so the payment is appropriate. Especially since you've given me all the information. I don't have to waste time looking for it. So I'm saying goodbye to you. Wait for my call." The detective began to indicate that the meeting was over. Betty said goodbye to him and left the office. When she stepped outside, she breathed a sigh of relief. It was so stuffy in the office. All the windows were shut tight, as if the detective didn't want a word to get out of that room. Betty got into the car and frowned. With all the problems and thoughts, she had completely forgotten about her husband's birthday, which would be as early as this Saturday. How could she forget like that? Shame? Betty shook her head and started the engine. Strangely, Stephen had gotten home early from work today. Not early, but on time. When Betty returned, he was already home. Betty raised her eyebrows in surprise. "Wow, you're early today. I hope nothing happened." Stephen looked at his wife glumly. "What do you mean?" "Something's bound to happen. If I got home on time?" "No, nothing much happened. Just a surgery canceled." "Why canceled?" Betty asked. Stephen muttered with some irritation. "The patient had some complications. The operation can't be done yet. It has been postponed for a while until the patient recovers." "What kind of complications?" Betty asked again. Stephen had already shouted indignantly. "You're getting a little carried away with your questions. You don't know anything about medicine. Why would I tell you something you don't know anything about?" "What's with the interrogation?" "Betty, you're starting to annoy me." Betty bit his lower lip resentfully. "You used to talk to me, share, socialize. Tell me what's different now. Have I gotten dumber? Or am I not allowed to ask you anything anymore? Or are you doing something illegal? I don't understand, Stephen." The husband immediately calmed down and tried to speak more gently. "What are you thinking of? Of course you haven't gotten any stupider, and I'm not doing anything illegal. I'm just tired. You see, I work almost no weekends. I don't have much free time. I don't even feel like talking. When I come home and you're asking me 1,000,000 questions. Well, not 1,000,000, just a few. And we're still a family. Maybe we should talk once in a while. What do you think?" Stephen didn't say anything. Betty tried to calm down. "Okay, don't get worked up right now." She didn't need this right now. She had another problem to solve, a more global one. "I realize you don't want to talk, tired and all. But I need to know something, so you're gonna have to talk to me. It's your birthday on Saturday. Do you have any plans, or are we going to spend the day together?" Stephen answered hastily. "Oh yes, I forgot to tell you. I've invited some colleagues from the clinic. John won't be able to come, but everyone else will. So we're having a party on Saturday. When were you going to tell me about this on Friday night? Or would I have known when all the guests showed up?" Betty flared up. "Oh, relax. Don't worry about it. I took care of everything. The food will be delivered from the restaurant on Saturday and the table will be set. All you have to do is find helpers and hire clinics. Nothing else is required of you. Betty looked at her husband. What's going on with him? He doesn't seem like himself, talking so casually. And the birthday party didn't go well. She was even a little embarrassed that she wasn't the one planning the party. So she's just gonna have to be patient. She'll find out soon enough. Soon she would realize if there was any good reason to worry. All right, forget it. How many people are coming? What should I be prepared for? Yeah, 15, 20 people, don't worry. Thank God we have plenty of room. That was the end of their conversation. Ditko didn't ask anything else. Stephen didn't say anything else. They went to bed in complete silence. Stephen only briefly wished her good night. Betty just as briefly answered him in the same way. Wonderful family life. Betty decided to take a few days to prepare for the holiday. Or rather, to prepare herself. She went to the beauty parlor, had her hair colored, cut a little. She got a manicure with red nail polish. She even got eyelash extensions. It was only natural, but it was progress. Clara complimented her when she saw her the night before Stephen's birthday. Well, my friend, you surprised me, didn't you? I've never seen you look so radiant. You've outdone yourself? Bravo. I just need to find a dress. I have a dress. I bought it last year, but I never used it. I think it will fit my look. Clara gave a satisfied hum. What about your friend? Are you pleasing me? Tell me, has the detective called with any news yet? No, Betty frowned. No news yet. Should call in the middle of next week. I'm a little worried. What's in store for me? Betty was actually quite nervous. She hoped the detective wouldn't bring her bad news. And if he did, what then? Hang in there, you'll get through this. But I think it's gonna be okay, and you're not worried. I hope so, Betty smiled. But there was a cat squeak in her heart. It was Saturday. Stephen had been right. He had arranged everything in the best possible way. Betty didn't have to worry about anything. The preparations for the evening were very sumptuous, but they were nothing. The only point that frightened Betty. She didn't know any of the people present. And why had Stephen thrown the party at home anyway? It could have been at a restaurant. Why did Stephen have the party at home? Everyone did. Champagne flowed, a buffet and appetizer tables were set up. There was laughter all around. Stephen introduced Betty to some of the guests, and then she took a moment and popped into the bedroom to catch her breath. Looking at herself in the mirror, Betty sighed. Yes, she thought, she would shine in this dress. But she just didn't know what outfits the other guests would be wearing. Compared to the fancy dresses of the other women, her dress was too plain and drab. Stephen said nothing to her about her appearance, but his gaze slid carefully over her face. Then he whispered, "What's wrong with your eyes?" Betty replied bewildered, "I've had my eyelashes done." What? You're making that up. You've never done that. Why are you wearing them now? They don't look good on you. Take them off tomorrow. You look like a cheap doll from an antique store. Well, Betty didn't expect any compliments from her husband. She was hurt, but she held back. She didn't say anything. Her husband just shrugged and stepped aside. Now, standing in her bedroom, she wanted to cry. She wanted to rip off all her jewelry, strip her dress to rags, tear off her hair, wipe off her makeup, and pull out those damn eyelashes. But she held back. The party wasn't over, and Betty didn't want to embarrass herself in front of everyone. She didn't want to be discussed at the clinic and called the surgeon's crazy wife. Betty calmed down and walked out of the bedroom. When she stepped out into the hall, she saw another guest next to Stephen. She hadn't been there before. She must have just now come in. It was a young girl. She was so dazzling that against her background, any woman present here was lost. She had long black hair, no hairstyle. It just went down to her shoulders and almost to her waist. Apparently, the girl had not only Russian blood in her, but something else. Her swarthy skin nodded in the light. She was very thin, but with beautiful and lush forms. The deep neckline on her breasts indicated her best assets. Betty had a suspicion that this dignity was not entirely natural. Her plump lips were covered in clear gloss. She smacked her lower lip now and then while talking to Stephen. Then the girl fixed her hair, flipped her mane forward, and Betty almost gasped in surprise. The back of the dress was even more revealing than the front, a completely open back up to the tops of her buttocks. It gave the impression that the girl was waist-deep naked. It was incredible. Betty had never seen such a revealing dress on anyone before. It left absolutely no room for imagination and fantasy. Everything was open and available, just by sliding the chick's dress to the side. How could the irreparable happen? Stephen passionately said something to the girl, looking her directly in the eyes, and the beauty occasionally laughed, leaving her head or leaning forward. From this, her neckline on her chest moved in different directions, revealing her breasts even more. Where's more to it than that, though? Betty frowned. Who's this? Only her husband's coworkers were here. But this girl looked like a photo model, not a doctor, much less a nurse. It's weird. Then Stephen stepped away from the girl, smiling at her. Betty was waiting for that. She immediately walked over to her husband and asked, "Who is this girl?" Stephen pretended not to realize which girl. Don't pretend, Stephen. Do you know who I'm talking about? You were just standing with a girl. Who's that? Does she work at your clinic? Is that a girl? Yes, she works at our clinic. She's a doctor. What's her name? Why do you need her name? Are you frowning? Stephen asked. Betty looked at her husband carefully. He was acting suspiciously. He's reacting strangely to her questions. He's always nervous. What did I ask? She's very pretty. I just wanted to know her name. Or you don't know your coworker's name, but she came to your birthday party. Isn't that interesting? Stephen was getting annoyed. What kind of nonsense are you saying? Of course I know her name. Her name is Evelyn. And she didn't just show up. I invited her, she's just a little late. Evelyn said thoughtfully to Betty, looking at the girl. How old is she? She's so young. Stephen replied irritably, how do I know how old she is? It doesn't interest me at all. She's probably about 20 or 25. I don't know exactly. What do you care? Don't you have anything else to talk about? You amaze me, Betty. And Stephen walked away from her. And Betty watched Evelyn. So young to be a doctor. Isn't that strange? Her husband had to work hard for years to be successful and reputable. And this Evelyn, at such a young age, working in a prestigious clinic. Who put her there? Maybe she's someone's daughter. Evelyn talked to a lot of people, and they were all disrespectful. Apparently, she does have credibility at this clinic, and she deserves it. Betty noticed something else. Evelyn was looking for someone among the guests, and she kept looking at the small watch on her wrist, as if she were in a hurry. And then Betty realized the reason for it. About an hour later, Stephen came up to her. It was getting late. The guests should have been leaving, but it was as if they were waiting for something. And Stephen said to his wife, "Honey, here's the thing. It turns out that John had prepared another present for me, and it was a surprise, and I didn't know about it, and nobody knew about it. He booked a private party at a nightclub just for employees of the firm. He bought everyone an admission ticket, and now we're on our way to this party. It's late, of course, but I can't say no. Unfortunately, I can't take you because you don't have a ticket. But you've never really liked nightclubs. That's right. You can lie down to rest, and the guests won't bother you later. We're leaving now, and the limo John ordered will pick us up. Now that's what I'm talking about, boss. You get some rest. You need to rest." Betty was listening to her husband in amazement. She couldn't believe her ears. A party. A nightclub. Everyone's going on vacation. I thought we'd spend the rest of the evening together. I haven't gotten you all your presents yet. I have one more. What about me? Betty asked. Honey, you have to understand me. I see every day with the boss, we rarely see each other. I can't turn down a party. John would consider it a personal insult. Do you want me to get in trouble later? Are you unhappy with my position? And you know I should be grateful to John for being the centerpiece of my career. If I refuse gifts from my superiors, I will quickly lose respect and trust. Those are the rules in today's world. You don't know anything about this. Why? I'm the one who tells you everything. Really, why? You can just leave me and go off with your coworkers, and I'll wait for you until morning. Yeah, is that what you're gonna do? Betty burst into flames. Stephen put his arm around her waist, whispered quietly, why do you resent it? I'm not going to sit there until morning. I'll stay for an hour or two, and then I'll go home. Don't worry, I won't stay there long. I just need to check in and show that I appreciate John's gesture. You lie down and rest. Your eyes are red. You're tired." Stephen kissed his wife on the cheek and then left. 10 minutes later, no one was in the house. After saying goodbye, everyone left. When everyone went outside, Betty could hear cheerful shouting and hooting from the house. Apparently, everyone was excited about the party. It would probably be more fun there than at home. Why was this happening? Why does she find herself more and more on the margins of her husband's life? Why is she always on the sidelines? She's the wife of a prestigious surgeon. But Betty tried not to be discouraged. She hoped for the best. Maybe it was for the best that Stephen was away. She would be able to get ready and meet him properly. She would wear the new lingerie she had purchased at a fancy women's store. Of course, the lingerie was very provocative and unusual, and she was not used to wearing such things. But Clara assured her that it was exactly what she needed. "Betty is just what the doctor ordered. I'm sure Stephen will appreciate it. Any man would. But you're a faithful wife, so I'll please my husband without shame. You think men don't need to be surprised? Yes, they do. So don't break it. Put that kid away and this discussion is over." Betty took the set out. Yes, the lingerie is very nice. She hoped she wasn't wearing it for nothing. She took a bath with a Christopher Hurt bubble bath, washed her head in a douche and put the lingerie on. According to her calculations, as Stephen had promised, he would have to return. What would she do waiting for him in the bedroom? She turned on the boss, lay down on the bed and waited. However, 30 minutes passed and he was no longer there. Another 30 minutes passed. It was already around 3 o'clock and Betty fell asleep. She woke up around 5 o'clock. Stephen was not home. She started to call him, but he was unavailable. She called him for half an hour. There was no result, so she got worried. And then she thought about the fact that she didn't have a single phone, at least not one of the clinic staff to call in an extreme situation. What if something happened to him? And no one had called her. What if he's in the hospital and she couldn't get through? Or he's been hit by a car and he's lying on the road somewhere? Oh my God, that's terrible. She'd have to do something or she'd go crazy. Betty threw on her robe and got ready to call the city hospital. Then she heard a noise in the hall. She came out and saw it was Stephen coming back. "Where have you been? Why didn't you call? What's wrong? I got divorced while I was waiting for you. Why didn't you answer the phone?" Betty screamed. Stephen raised his eyebrows and said calmly, "Why are you yelling like that? I told you we were going to the club. Nothing else happened. I didn't answer the phone because the connection's bad. And I thought you were asleep. I didn't want you to be disturbed. What's so scary that you're so nervous? I'm fine. I came home." Betty cried even more. "But you said you wouldn't be late. I was waiting for you. You could have come out of the club and called. Would you have told me you were holding out? You promised me you'd be here soon. How can you do this to me? What are you making a tragedy out of this? I've stayed up till morning many times at work when there were special cases or emergency surgeries. What's the big deal? Well, I got held up. It's no big deal. When I'm late at work, you don't yell, so I couldn't leave. John wouldn't let me go. We had a little fun, and then we talked about things at the clinic. It's very important to me. I couldn't just up and leave. Stop freaking out, Betty. What kind of business can you talk about in a nightclub? Do you take me for a fool?" Stephen took off his shirt, tossed it carelessly on the table. He smiled slightly and said quietly, "Betty, you're from another world. At the nightclub, we had a VIP room rented. Our company was there alone, no outsiders. We went out to the common room if we wanted to dance, and the rest of the time we sat in a special room where there was no noise and crowd. There we socialized. What's unusual about that? Calm down, you're too nervous. Maybe you should see a doctor. Maybe you're going through menopause. It's very serious. Then you need help. It's not something to be trifled with." Betty looked at her husband and didn't know what to say. What menopause? She's only 38 years old. She is still young. Why is he saying these things that really hurt her? She kept her eyes on Stephen. He was calm. He wasn't staggering around like a drunk. He was completely adequate. Of course, she's not menopausal yet, but it wouldn't hurt to get her nerves straightened out. She was getting worked up over every little thing and already felt she was on the verge of hysterics. The eternal suspicion has driven her crazy, and she can't take it anymore. She needs to go to the doctor, let them prescribe her calming pills, or she will definitely destroy her family herself, and not because of the fault of her husband's unproven cheating, which she just suspects. After all, men who cheat, they do not behave so calmly. They lie, they dodge, they make things up. They are embarrassed and nervous. Stephen is calm, smiling and looking her in the eye. He's even humming a little tune. You can tell by the look of him that he just relaxed and had a good time. And now he's happy. She was crazy. She got herself a girlfriend. What an idiot. She really needs professional medical attention. I was afraid for you. I was worried. I made you a surprise, by the way. I put on some new underwear, quietly said Betty, and embarrassed, untied the robe on Stephen, taking a quick glance at her. Just then he looked regretfully into her eyes. Honey, that's so sweet, but I'm so tired. Let's put that aside for later sometime. You'll show it to me? Not now. You washed me last night. I'm so tired my eyes are closing. If I don't go to bed now, I'll fall asleep right here on the floor. So let's go to bed. We'll talk tomorrow. And Stephen shoved her robe smack on her cheek and went into the bedroom. Betty remained standing, looking after him. Then she sighed and looked around her. How lonely is she in this house? How she longed to be in someone's warm arms. How necessary it is to be needed. Why does she feel so bad? Why does she feel trouble coming? The constant anxiety is driving her crazy. It's impossible to be tense all the time. How much more can she take? Betty drank some water, then set the glass on the table. There was a sharp knocking sound in the silence that made her flinch. Betty walked over to the window, tightly plowed into a robe that didn't keep her warm. But it didn't help her. She didn't settle down and acquiesce. She looked out the window. There was no one outside. There was still the occasional short bark of a dog somewhere. Betty sighed and went to bed. She would take a drink, take a sleeping pill, and lie down next to her soundly sleeping husband. And tomorrow, she would settle down and smile at her husband again, hoping for his attention. She didn't know what she wanted, but she felt that the end was near. Betty felt as if she had sensed the day before that something would happen soon. When she got up in the morning, her husband was gone. Betty looked at the clock and wrinkled her nose. It was already 12 o'clock. She had never gotten up that late. Apparently the sleeping pills had kicked in. The pills, and her head was buzzing badly from them. Or from a sleepless night, or from all the worry. Betty drank some water from the glass on the table and wanted to lie down again. But then she saw the screen of her phone blinking. Someone was calling, but she couldn't hear because the phone was in crazy mode. Oh, let them call. She doesn't want to talk to anyone. She picked up the phone to turn it off altogether. But then she saw something that quickly brought her to her senses. The screen showed 10 missed calls from William the detective she'd entrusted to watch her husband. And there were 5 messages from him as well. Oh, he'd been calling her all morning, and she'd been dragging her feet at this point. He must have had something important to call so many times. Betty immediately shook off the remnants of sleep. Her head immediately stopped buzzing. She dialed the detective's number and called him back. He didn't pick up for a long time, and Betty felt nervous. A thin, damp hand dabbed at the sheet. And then William finally answered. I can see you're anxious to hear from me. Betty, good morning. Or rather, good day. Betty, smiling, said to herself nervously with a changing tone. Hello, William. I'm sorry, I've been busy. I've been very busy. I couldn't answer. Actually, I left my phone at home. I just got here. I saw your calls and messages, and I called you right back. William laughed. His laugh was frightening. It was the laugh of a man who knows other people's secrets. Betty, you have forgotten who you are talking to. As I will remind you, I am a detective, and I know many things about all sorts of people, from ordinary little people to the most famous people in town. I've been sitting in the car outside your house since 700 hours. I saw your husband leave, and I saw that you didn't leave the house or come in. Just what does that mean, that you've been home all this time? Or could it mean that you didn't spend the night at all? But that's unlikely. Otherwise, I'd know from the look on your husband's face that you were out. And since he had gone out in good spirits, you were in your house. Betty covered with goosebumps. She winced and sighed. Yes, you're right. I was asleep. I had taken a sleeping pill, put my phone on silent mode, and slept until noon. I just now woke up and saw that you had called me. I apologize for that senseless and stupid lie. No, you're not. You don't have to apologize to me. I just showed you that you can make fun of any little thing in front of other people. Lie to them once. Always be careful. Or don't lie or lie. Only when you're sure your lie won't be exposed. Betty stared at one point, and after hearing the detective, what a strange man, but his voice is mesmerizing. Betty felt calm, as if she had been to a hypnosis session. She exhaled slowly. Okay, let's get this over with. I think you've understood me correctly and will apply the expert advice in the future. Now let's talk about the present. I'm ready to give you my report. I think I have gathered enough information for you, and I would like you to familiarize yourself with it as soon as possible. I have a client who urgently needs my help. I've dealt with your case, and I'd like to move on to the next one as soon as possible. I'll meet you in the car in half an hour. I think that should give you enough time to shower, clean up, and have a coffee. Oh, that's great. I'll meet you outside. Betty looked out the window. There were no cars in the neighborhood. Strange man. But Betty didn't dwell on his oddities. She was more concerned with the information the detective had gotten for her about the end or continuation of her family life. Or it's all a hoax and the detective will convince her of that. Either way, she'd find out soon enough. And Betty took a quick shower. She was outside in 20 minutes. Her head stopped buzzing after the shower as she drank a strong coffee. Betty looked around and saw cars not far away. Headlights flashed, and then a car started up and pulled up right next to Betty. The car door in the front opened and Betty sat down next to the driver. Hello, Betty. You look beautiful. Betty wrinkled his nose. You've learned everything I asked. I still haven't had breakfast. Let's go to a place where I was walking. And you look at my materials and we won't be interrupted. 25 minutes later, they were already sitting at a table in a cafe where students usually go for a snack. They were seated in a corner where they could hardly be seen. William himself brought a tray of food, and then he placed a folder with documents in front of Betty. The woman took a deep breath before opening it. There were many papers there, handwritten in smooth handwriting. Strange that the detective didn't use a computer. Or maybe he'd purposely written everything himself to pad himself. And there were a lot of photos of varying quality. Betty took one of them with trembling hands. In this picture, Stephen was in a white medical suit. He was standing on the threshold of the clinic. Next to him stood a girl with long black hair. Apparently, they were talking. Stephen was smiling as he looked at his interlocutor. Betty put the photo aside and took the next picture. Here the girl was already face-turned. She was wearing huge black glasses. Betty didn't know who it was. Taking the next picture, Betty saw Stephen in the restaurant. On the table next to his arm was a long red rose. Stephen was alone, but his pensive look said he was waiting for someone. And the next photograph put everything in its place. It was taken in the same place, in a cafe. Only now Stephen was sitting at the table, and even the dark hair of a woman. And Betty saw the face of this girl. It was Evelyn, an employee of the clinic and a doctor. She was wearing a revealing dress that revealed her artificial breasts. Evelyn was holding Rose in her hands and smiling gently at Stephen. Betty looked up at the detective, the one nonchalantly devouring his breakfast. This is the doctor from her husband's clinic. She told him for some reason. The detective looked at her, took a sip of water, and said she doesn't work at the clinic, like she doesn't. She told me what? Your husband said she works as a doctor at the clinic. I understood, but she doesn't. Although she does have a clinic relationship. The detective stared at Betty and remained silent. The woman was beginning to lose patience. So what kind of relationship does she have? Gregory quietly said, this is Evelyn, the wife of the owner of the clinic, John. There was silence. Betty looked at the picture again. John's wife. That's how. Stephen had been bullshitting her. He brought this girl into their home without even worrying that Betty might find out something about their relationship. The detective got comfortable, sat back in his chair, and kept talking. Evelyn, 23 years old. Your husband has been in a relationship with her for 2 years. No one knows about their relationship. These pictures were taken at a restaurant in a VIP room where no outsiders are allowed. Don't ask me how I got these pictures. That's my business and my secrets. I had a job to do, and I did it. How do I know they've been in a relationship for 2 years? Don't ask me that either. I'm not telling you that either. But they've been lovers for a long time. That's a fact. The husband doesn't know about the double life. Evelyn, you didn't know either. The couple is often together in the same hotel, where they observe complete secrecy. John often travels to different cities and countries. When he's away, does your husband often stay at Evelyn's house? I caught a glimpse of it. There's a photo. Look, your husband is obviously disguised, but I know it's him, and you'll recognize him, I'm sure. She pulled out the next photo. A taxi cab pulled up in front of a large mansion, and a man stood beside the car, sunglasses on. It was Stephen. This is a picture I took before your husband's birthday. Next photo. Look here, your husband is carrying in a case of dresses from a fancy store. He came to visit his mistress to give her the dress. In this dress, she was in your house. And this next picture is Saturday, yesterday afternoon. The whole group of friends who were at your party. Tell me, what did your husband say to you yesterday when he left with everyone together and you stayed home? Betty, barely audible, whispered, looking at the pictures. He said that John had arranged a surprise for him, that they were going to a nightclub to have fun and socialize with their coworkers, and that it was invitation only, and I wouldn't be allowed in. The detective smirked, though his expression was sympathetic. Your husband circled the drain, and you didn't notice it. They actually all went to the nightclub together for the party your husband threw, not Christopher. There were no invitation cards to get in. It was free, and Stephen wasn't there very long. Half an hour later, he left with Evelyn for the hotel, where they stayed until almost morning. Betty, your husband was with his mistress all night. As soon as he left the hotel, I immediately printed out the pictures and drove to your house. Betty was devastated. Such a betrayal from the man she had lived with for so long. It wasn't something she was prepared for. She clamped her eyes shut to keep the tears from streaming down her cheeks. But it didn't help. Just a moment, if you'll excuse me. I need to step back, she said, getting up from the table. She didn't know how she found the restroom, but she managed it. She cried so hard, but immediately stopped herself. What she's doing? She's been deceived, betrayed, trampled, destroyed, and she's crying. She needs to pull herself together. She needs to figure out what to do next. And then she thought of Roma. The way he'd looked at her when they'd met by chance. That look spoke volumes. Stephen hadn't had that look with Betty for a long time. But she recognized that look in the pictures only now. Stephen had looked like that at another woman, at Evelyn, the wife of his boss. Betty looked at herself in the mirror. There was nothing more she could do. Her marriage ended today. It ended the moment she saw the pictures of Stephen and his mistress. Betty washed her face, then wiped her face thoroughly with a handkerchief she pulled from her purse. Taking a deep breath, she put on her sunglasses and then left the restroom. She returned to the table. The detective frowned when he saw the sunglasses on Betty, but didn't say anything to her. He liked it better when people didn't have glasses on, as he could watch their reactions. People loved drama. His clients would play out entire performances when they learned of betrayal or deceit. Betty was different. She chose to hide her emotions by hiding in the restroom. All the papers are in a folder with various meeting details. There's also all of Evelyn's information in there. And you haven't looked at the hotel photos from the night before. They turned out very interesting, the detective said. Betty interrupted him. I got it. Thank you for your service. I'm very pleased with your work. How much do I owe you? I don't have much cash on me, but I can wire you the amount you need. Betty said in an even tone of voice. The detective lowered his gaze. I'm pleased with my work too. I've never been able to get all the information I need so quickly, and you don't owe me anything. I did it for you for nothing. Don't ask me why. There is one, but I won't tell you, I'm sorry. Everything I've learned and obtained is in this folder. I gave it to you. I hope we never meet again. My services are very expensive, but I don't want to charge you, so I hope you won't need my services. No, I won't need anything else. I'll be leaving soon. I'll be gone forever." The detective raised one eyebrow. The woman continued to surprise him. It had been evident from her first meeting that she had hoped her suspicions wouldn't come true. But she had quickly accepted the circumstances. She would build her life anew. "Well, that's wonderful. Thank you, you've been very helpful. I won't discourage you from giving up the money. I can see that your decision is final. Good luck to you." "Goodbye," said Betty. She gathered all the papers and pictures into a folder. Then she got up and left. The detective looked after her with a thoughtful look. Betty hailed a cab while she waited for the car. She thought about what she was going to do next. She was going to get revenge on the man she loved, the man she trusted, the man she had given the best years of her life to. The decision came suddenly as she looked at herself in the mirror in the bathroom. She deserved to be happy without all of this. No one could run her life but herself. When Betty arrived home, Stephen met her. She was somewhere, traveling on business. "So," Stephen shrugged. "Nothing, I'm going to go work in the office. And then I have to leave on business. I'll be back late." And Stephen sat down at the computer. Betty had already thought of it. What revenge there would be when her husband left on his business, she would put her plan into action. She sat down in the bedroom, pulled out the folder the detective had given her. She looked through the pictures she hadn't seen. They were from the hotel. She didn't look at them for long because she felt disgusted. She hurriedly shoved them into the folder. And then she saw a small flash drive. She slipped it into her personal laptop. On the flash drive were all the pictures the detective had given her. What is it that makes it easier for her? A couple hours later, Stephen left. Before he did, he took a shower at the shower. Betty realized he was on his way to Evelyn's. She noticed everything now. After he left, Betty went to his office. She opened his email. There she found this folder. Here are the email addresses, all the clinic staff, and most importantly, John's address. "All right, well, it's time to start having fun. Let's see how you like it." Stephen said out loud to Betty, and Betty downloaded all the pictures of Evelyn and Stephen and sent them out to all the clinic staff. But then she thought that wasn't enough and sent those photos to all of Stephen's contacts. The whole thing was done. Stephen arrived 3 o'clock later. It was late evening. He didn't say anything to his wife. It was obvious no one had called him yet. But then, everything will be known tomorrow. The husband went to bed, and Betty sat in the kitchen for a long time. She had placed a chair near the window. The woman drank coffee, looked out the window, and thought about her life. In the morning, Stephen left for work, and half an hour later he called Betty. "Betty, I'm in big trouble." He yelled when she answered his call. "What do you mean?" Betty asked calmly. "We can't even imagine what happened." "Stephen, what's the matter?" "Explain it to me." Stephen shouted into the receiver. "I've been set up by everyone. God, everyone got some weird photoshopped pictures. Someone hacked into my email and sent provocative pictures to all the staff from the clinic. And not just the staff. Oh my God, this is a nightmare. What is going on here?" Stephen said something else, but Betty wasn't really listening. And then she said quietly, "I did it." "What? What did you say? I don't understand." Betty said louder, "I did it, Stephen, and I sent those pictures out. And you know they're not fake, right? I know the whole truth, Stephen. And now you're gonna pay for everything you've done." After a moment, Stephen shouted at Betty, "What have you done? You idiot. Where did you get those pictures? What kind of bitch slanders me? You know it's not true." "Oh really? It's not true. It's a lie. You're telling me?" "It's as much a lie as Evelyn being a doctor at the clinic. I know who she is as John's wife. I just have 2 questions for you. How could you bring a mistress into our house? And why didn't you just divorce me if you didn't want me anymore? If we had just broken up, none of this would have happened. But you've been lying to me for years. You slept with that young girl, and I waited for you at home every day. You mocked me, said hurtful words. You used to be ready to carry me in your arms. Why, when things changed, didn't you just talk to me? We would have had an amicable separation. And you just violated my trust. You're a scoundrel, Stephen, and I don't regret it one bit. Let everyone know who it really is. And most importantly, let John find out. I think he'll do the right thing by you." And Betty hung up. Stephen heard the dial tone and threw his phone against the wall. It shattered into several pieces all over the office. Stephen growled again like a wounded animal and flopped down in his chair. He closed his eyes and let go of his head on the chair, on top of it with his hands. He had come to work today in a good mood. However, everyone greeted him unfriendly. Many coworkers whispered behind his back a few people. They didn't even say hello, and his assistant looked at him fearfully. What happened on the iPad today? I missed something interesting. Everyone's acting so weird. Hilarious, asked Stephen when he got to his office. But the assistant wasn't as cheerful as before. She mumbled confusedly. Oh, Stephen, I can't. I don't know what to tell you. And I'd rather not get involved in any gossip. I'll go, you call me if you need anything. And she skipped out of the office like a scalded man. Stephen shrugged his shoulders, which is the way it is with everyone today. But half an hour later, John showed up at his office. Stephen smiled welcomingly. When he saw the chief, he extended his hand to greet him. But instead of a handshake, he got a punch in the face. And then John told him what he thought of him. And Stephen realized that Shiriev had somehow found out about him and Evelyn. But that wasn't all. The last thing the chief said was, "You don't work here anymore. You're fired. I did a favor for a friend, hired you, got you patients, gave you a great salary, and you spit in my face, taking what's mine. You humiliated me. Nobody touches my wife, and you dare touch her. Now you're a nobody here. You can't get a job anywhere. I'll ruin your reputation, so no one will want to work with you. I have a lot of authority. I'll make sure you'll never work in any city again. They won't even hire you as an orderly. You hear me? You've signed your own death warrant. I don't know who played a joke on you by sending those pictures to everyone in your mail. But I'm glad that person was found. Now everyone will know you're the ultimate scumbag. Pack your things and get out of here. I want you out of here in an hour." And John left, slamming the door. So Stephen's certificate flew off the wall. Stephen immediately opened his laptop, looked at his mail. There in the sent messages were a bunch of messages to all his contacts. Stephen suppressed a groan and opened one of the messages. And there he saw pictures of himself and Evelyn. How awful. Somebody had done this nasty thing and ruined his life, and that someone turns out to be his own wife. It's a total failure, a fiasco. Bro, Stephen whispered. While he was packing up his office, not a single person came in. The operations scheduled for that day would apparently be done by someone else, most likely his rival. Well, that's a great end to a career. When he left the clinic, not a single person looked in his direction. No one said goodbye to him. No one gave him even a farewell handshake. Everyone smiled at his face when he was a successful surgeon, and everyone turned away when he refused to get dirty in the mud. Betty, meanwhile, was packing her things. She made quick work of it by hailing a cab. She announced with her eyes one last time her home, where she had been both happy and unhappy. Never again would she cross the threshold of this house. It is no longer their family nest. It's just a house. An ordinary house that maybe another family will soon live in. Maybe they will be happier here than Betty and Stephen. Betty drove to the hotel. After getting a room, she immediately called Slyara and told her and all. Slaga quickly realized that Betty needed help, but Betty only asked for the number of a lawyer. "I'm filing for divorce, Slaga, and I'm going to start a new life. Don't worry, I'm fine. I'm even better now than I was. So don't worry, I just have a couple things to take care of. And then I'll tell you everything in order." Betty called the lawyer, solved a few questions about the divorce. Tomorrow she will go to court with him, write a power of attorney, do everything to make the divorce take place without her presence in court. Everything can be done with money, and she has, thank God, plenty of money. She had a personal account where Stephen regularly deposited large sums, and Betty never spent almost anything. There was a fair amount of money in there. It would be enough for the first time, and then she would have another life. She would take care of it. She picked up the phone again and called someone. There was no answer. She called another number, also with no answer. Betty sighed and dialed the last number. On the third ring, she got an answer. "Hello, Christopher." I recognized it. "Of course you did. Christopher, I'm calling to tell you, Christopher, I'm getting a divorce. I'm leaving my husband. He betrayed me. I can't be in this town anymore. Say what you said still stands, then I'll do it. Christopher, I want to see you as soon as possible. How foolish I've been, Christopher. Forgive me. Stephen stood at the window in his house for a week. He hadn't left the house. His home phone was ringing off the hook. Finally, he'd smashed the receiver. Now there was silence in the house. His new cell phone was on its usual mode. It, too, had hundreds of missed calls and messages. But Stephen answered a personal one. He had learned through messages that Betty had filed for divorce. Evelyn only called him once the day after the incident. She screamed into the phone. John kicked me out of the Stephen house. Can you imagine? He threw me out in disgrace. He took all the jewelry. He took everything. I'm broke. A friend took me in. I'm in shock. How could this happen? Who was following us? Did John suspect us of something? It's my wife. Somehow she found out about us. Your wife. Are you kidding me? The bitch is a bitch. She ruined my life. God, what am I gonna do now? I got nothing. How am I gonna live? What shame. What horror. Stephen tried to calm his mistress. Calm down, Evelyn. Don't worry. Everything will be all right. Come to my place. My wife left. She filed for divorce. Can you live with me now? You have to live with you. Are you out of your mind? Who are you? A doctor who can't even work anymore? You're nothing without me. You're nothing. You're nothing. You've ruined everything. You and your dead wife. Go to hell. I don't want to hear any more about you. You don't exist to me anymore. I won't even say goodbye. Get out of my life. And she hung up. Stephen put the phone carefully on the table. He just bought it. It can't be broken. Now he has to think about the fact that he has no more income. What should he do next? Where to go? He didn't know. He closed his eyes with both resentment and helplessness. A month passed. Betty stood at the airport. She had just flown in. She couldn't believe she was in Paris. She had never been to Europe, and here was Paris. God. She was afraid to move. Betty looked around and suddenly saw someone ahead of her. She smiled shyly, but she couldn't move. Christopher, with a huge bouquet of flowers, approached her closely. He smiled, looking into her eyes. Hello, ma'am. I am very happy to see you. I've waited for this moment, perhaps all my life. May I have your hand? I'll show you Paris. Betty hugged him tightly around the neck and closed her eyes. You've never been anywhere. I've never been to France. Why not? I feel like I've come home. Christopher her and whispered in her ear, you've never been anywhere. Why, my love, I'd love to show you the world. We have our whole lives ahead of us. Betty squeezed even tighter on the shoulders of the man who had once taken a place in her heart and never left. Yes, he would. She didn't doubt it.